I'm Jonathan Worsley from The Bench, and today I'm joined by my good friend Philip Barnes, CEO of Rotana. Philip, very, very nice to see you on this podcast.
Always good to see you, Jonathan.
That's great. Now, last time you and I were on a podcast, I was in Canada at my cottage and you were in Abu Dhabi. You've been traveling for 6 months, seeing all your hotels because you had started back in February 2024, I believe. So hopefully, I can only assume that travel is probably continued.
Yeah, it's a different kind of travel, but it has continued. I mean, it's funny is when you said that, and you said you have been traveling. I was thinking to myself, when did I stop? Yeah, I mean, that's the world we live in. You're always on a plane. You're always going somewhere to meet people, to look at a development, to see a hotel, to talk to the teams, whatever it may be. So that is my life. I try to balance it, but I don't always succeed, but I do try.
So, Philip, you're a five-continent hotelier. Actually, I'd be interested to know, is there a membership club for being a five-continent hotelier?
If there isn't, it's not one I'm familiar with, Jonathan. You know, there used to be a lot of different, or how would I call them, associations in the industry, but I think they're just very hard to maintain, so they've gone away. I was invited to participate something several years ago called the Global Hoteliers Club. And, and it was literally full of global hoteliers, but it's kind of gone by the way of the by. So not that I'm aware of today's world.
Well, anyway, you are a five-continent hotelier. If I was setting up a membership club, you would be my first on that list because you started with Four Seasons, GM role, senior leadership stints with Shangri-La, then 25 years with Fairmont, from the Savoy in London to the Fairmont Century Plaza in Los Angeles, before taking the helm at Rotana in 2024, a Middle East hotel company, and certainly it's been a champion for the region. Since joining Rotana, you have been steering the company through an ambitious expansion plan to open 43 new properties across 26 cities from 100 and currently 114 hotels, as I understand it, or 30,000 keys. So a little bit of background there on Rotana, and it's always good to see a Middle East champion, as I said earlier, a Middle East champion of it that is making its mark in the region. So on this podcast, I like to talk about, your personal journey, leadership, moving on to Rotana and your vision, your outlook on the industry. And then we'll move into one of your passions, of course, which is all about team development, talent development. So Philip, on your personal journey, tell us about the very, very early days. What actually made you wake up and say one day that I'm going to join the hospitality industry? What was it that triggered that?
Jonathan, I came from a family where we did not have a lot of money. And so as teenagers, as soon as we were old enough to get any kind of a job, we were expected to get a job. And especially, of course, during the school holidays. And at that point, my family was living in a little village, not in the middle of Sussex, not far from Gatwick Airport. And so my first summer job of any substance actually involved working in the kitchens of an airline catering company. And you go into a kitchens, as you're well aware, and the camaraderie and the energy and the buzz is pretty contagious. And it was very hard work. There was no two ways about it. It was constant. And there was, I peeled thousands of eggs, let's put it that way. And it was, but I enjoyed it. Anyway, I did that for a couple of years, and then a little hotel opened in the village, brand new hotel, which was the beginnings actually of the Copthorne chain. And it was the first hotel, and it was in Copthorne in Sussex. And I thought, well, because I've been in the kitchens there, maybe I should go across and talk to these guys. So I did and got a summer job with them, but it wasn't in the kitchens. It was effectively, and I always think of this fondly, I was called a GA, otherwise known as a general assistant. And when people say to me, well, what did that mean? I said, that meant you did whatever they told you, whenever they told you to do it. And it was a 6-day week, and it was split shifts. And so I'd get in the morning at 7:30, and I might end up serving breakfast, or I might end up being a cashier in the restaurant, or I might end up on the front desk, or I might end up answering the phone. I mean, I literally did everything. And I loved it. I loved the fact that every day was different. And as crazy as it sounds, that was the hook. And once I got into it, there was no going back. So that's where it all began. And I was very blessed. I had a general manager there, a general manager by the name of Paolo De Paul, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But Paolo was an incredible leader, mentor, and father figure. And so that also played a big part in not just my decision to stay in the hotel business, but also it has influenced me subsequently on many occasions by merit of the way Paolo behaved and how you felt like you were one of the family. So that's where it began. And I will tell you that my father did everything in his power to convince me this was a bad idea. At the time, and I would suggest to you for many years subsequently, that the hotel industry or the service industry was looked upon as being just that. You were going to be a servant. It was not seen as a profession. It was not seen as having that you did not require the kind of business skills that at the end of the day you do require. So it was very differently looked at. But it was only when I took on my first job as a general manager with Four Seasons in Houston, and my parents were visiting, and my mother finally accepted the fact that actually I had a real job. Up until then, my father swears that she used to think I was a waiter.
So what did your father want you to become?
I don't think I don't think my father really. I think they just. I mean, to be honest with you, I was not a great academic. I was not a good pupil at school, and I think they just wanted me to find a decent job. I mean, this is a very different time. My mother's perspective was, you need to have a job with a good pension. Which was very much the British way back then. If you've got a job with a good pension, you're good. And that, to say to somebody who's 19 or 20 years of age that you should be thinking about a pension is like, I mean, why bother? You're not thinking that way at all. So that was their idea. They were both, my parents were both teachers, which is why they weren't terribly well off. For them, it was all about stability. For them, it was all about, settling down and, going through life as they had done and as, people subsequently continued to do for a long time. Which is something that, of course, to me is really quite alien, the idea of staying in the same place for decades. I just can't imagine it. I'm jealous of people who do sometimes, but I'm also very grateful for my own journey as well, because I've done things I never imagined I would do, and I've been places I never imagined. So, coming from a council house in Manchester, which is where I was born, that's a very big journey, right? So, but one I've loved.
When's the book, Philip?
When is the book? I've had so many people say you should write a book, and it's like, I could never write a book. And why not? Well, because I'd have to change too many names to protect the guilty.
Anyway, what a great story, and I love that you stuck with your passion and carried on in the industry, because it certainly has led to just an amazing career. So, skipping just a few years. So, what motivated you to take on the role of CEO and lead Rotana's growth and strategy?
I've told this story on many occasions, and you referenced about the Middle East. I came out here in, I want to say, November of 23, December of 23. I don't remember exactly when. I was asked to come out. My chief operating officer and I had worked together before. He was my director of sales and marketing. Then he became my director of rooms, and then became my number two. Back in the days when I was the regional VP for the Middle East and was based in Dubai. He called in and said, why don't you come out and have a chat? And I sat down with the chairman, and actually Shaker, his daughter, was with him, and Salim, the deputy chairman, were with him. But obviously, this is the Al Nawais family's company. We're an Emirati company. The Al Nawais family are the major shareholders. And the chairman spent most of the time that we were talking about quality. And he was talking about quality of the guest experience, and he was talking about quality of the colleague experience, and he was talking about taking care of people. And whilst I had lived in the region before and knew a lot of Emiratis, I had not had the exposure that I started to get there and then to an Emirati family's view of hospitality. But in the course of those conversations, Jonathan, he never asked me once about profit and loss statements, financial results. We never talked about any of those things. For him, it was that if you take care of the guest and you take care of the colleague who takes care of the guest, then that's what will drive the profitability of the company. And that is a philosophy that has been mine for many years. So for me, it was such a breath of fresh air, quite honestly, at this stage in my life, that was the reason that I wanted to take it on. Now, I should add that Shaker Al Nawais, who, as you now know, has become Secretary General elect for the United Nations, was sitting there through these conversations. And I have teased her mercilessly on many occasions subsequently, but she was looking at me like, who is this guy? Where is he coming from? Is this the right person? And if you know anything of my relationship with Shaker today, it's night and day from those initial conversations. And she walked into my office a couple of months after I started, and she said to me, "I will never judge a book by its cover again," which is indicative of the relationship that Shaker and I have. But Shaker is also indicative of that Emirati hospitality. And I'll give you a quick glimpse into that. When I picked up some kind of chest infection and was home for a few days, and she was relentless. Relentless in calling, are you well? Do you need food? Do you need me to make a doctor's appointment? All of these things. Now, you could say, Jonathan, well, that's because you're the CEO. And for me, I actually thought that at the time that may possibly have something to do with it. Come to find out, I was talking to one of my colleagues the following week, and I said, Shaker just wouldn't leave me alone. He said, well, that's the way she is with everybody. And that is that Emirati hospitality, care and concern that comes from true Emirati families like the Al Nawais family. So, I'm not suggesting for 1 second that, that comes into every aspect of business, because at the end of the day, it is still a business. But when you know that is the guiding principle behind the family, it makes decision-making a lot easier, because you're very clear about the fact that it's taking care of people and doing the right thing. So, long-winded way of answering the question, but that was it. It was the chairman's fault. Or as I say, it was Eddie's fault that I was here, and it was the chairman's fault that he hired me.
Okay, I got it. It sounds like a very much a family business that it looks after its employees and looks after its guests, and of course its owners as well.
And as I was in the 18 months that I've been around, Jonathan, I would say to you that I have heard story after story from members of the team as to the chairman's generosity, the chairman's kindness, the chairman's concern. All right. And I tease Shaker mercilessly that the greatest strength of a family business is it's a family business. And in the next breath, I was reminded that the greatest challenge is that it's a family business. Because there is, it's not, you can never just rely on clear-cut business decisions, because there may be a relationship in there. There may be something you're unaware of. So you do have to make sure you're familiar with the reasons why we are doing business with people. Because there is that family relationship that plays a part.
So what are some of your greatest learnings then from working at the Copthorne in the early days through to working at Fairmont at Four Seasons Shangri-La? How has that shaped your approach to leadership?
Listen, Jonathan, I feel like I've been blessed to have worked with some phenomenal leaders along the way. Um, and I've also been blessed to work with some dreadful leaders along the way. You've been examples of how not to do it. Um, I mentioned Paolo a few minutes ago because he was my first GM. When I worked for Four Seasons, which I did for 10 years, I worked for some incredible people there. I worked for a gentleman called Jim Fitzgibbon, who went on to be president of Four Seasons for a while. I worked for John Sharp, who was the also president of Four Seasons, not related to Isidore Sharp. These were incredible leaders, and you learn from these people by example. You learn by merit of what they do and how they do it, and they would cut through it. And then I subsequently went on, and I use this example because to me it is typical. It is indicative of the importance of your leader. I joined Canadian Pacific Railways kicking and screaming. I had a call from a friend of mine who I'd worked with in Four Seasons, who called me and said, "You should come and talk to us." And I said, "Absolutely not. I'm not interested in, you've got these big railway hotels. I don't know what they're doing." And I couldn't care less. And he said, "Well, do me a favor." He said, "Please just fly to Calgary, meet with Chris Cahill, who is our president, I think he's president at the time, and just meet with Chris. And then I'll leave you alone if you continue to say no." Well, Jonathan, I'm sure that you know Chris. I'm sure that you know Chris quite well. And Chris is a prime example of a leader that I have looked up to and did look up to for well over 20 years of working with it. He's humble, he's smart, he's capable, he's driven. He cares passionately about the business, cares passionately about people. And when you work with someone like that, as an example, that really sets the path for you. He came to the Rotana Leadership Conference in May of this year at my request and talked to the team as a whole about the change process, change management, and everything that occurs during that, and the challenges and everything else. And I was chatting with him afterwards, and I said, "I couldn't help but smile, Chris, because you were talking about the change process." And I was thinking to myself as you talked, I was thinking, "Yep, I was there when we did that. I was there when we did that. I was there when you did that. I was all the way through it." But they're educational. He had working with him a gentleman who subsequently passed away, who I miss tremendously, by the name of John Williams. John was his number two. And John was similarly very strong leader, very demanding leader, the kind of gentleman who walked into a room and everybody sat up because John had walked in. But John was one of those people who would be pushing and shoving 1 minute, and the next minute would be saying thank you, and I appreciate what you've done, and you knew that he always had your back. So those two with Fairmont, and then there's one other which I think was very educational because he didn't come from the hotel industry, which was when I was general manager of the Shangri-La in Singapore. I reported to the board. And the chairman of the board was a gentleman called Go Susia, who was in charge of Robert Kwok's development division, so not the hotel side. And Susia became my boss and was the first one to say to you, "I know nothing about the hotel business." And I would say, "Well, I will, help you in every way I can." But the education that I got from him as to how to look at other components of business and other viewpoints of the world was incredible. And so that to me that's when you go through your career and you look back and you go, I've been so blessed. And then, as I say, working with others who I learned not to do it from because their egos were too big, or they were authoritarian, or they were bullies, or whatever it may be. And so you get molded by all of these things along the way. And I think you're lucky to work with great leaders.
Leaders learn from having a good team around you, and it sounded like you had a good team around you, and you learned huge amounts.
There's one other component, I think, that I don't want to sort of miss it out altogether, but I do believe that you are also very much the product of your family environment. And I say family because in my situation, it was predominantly my sister played a very large part in my upbringing. And I do think that plays a part in helping you become the person that you become. And she, for example, in the later years of her life, was a teacher for children with challenges. And that when you're you have somebody in your family who has that kind of approach to life. You are also, those are influences, that significant influences for you that remain with you throughout.
Well, we could carry on this whole leadership talk because it's so interesting, and you know what makes a great leader. But let's move on to Rotana, and a little about the markets you're going into, such as Pakistan, Georgia, Senegal, Saudi Arabia. Huge growth going on in Saudi Arabia, which is very exciting. And then some of your alliance that you're doing with GHA, the loyalty program. So, um, so tell us a little bit about this growth strategy, because you're still a family business. You've got what is it, 114 hotels now?
Yeah, we're between operating and developing, we're at about 115, between 115 and 120.
But significant growth. So how do you manage this? How do you manage the family business, and then you're growing to such an extent?
Well, Jonathan, I will add this. Again, I have been given, the chairman was very clear with me very early on. You run the business. You do what needs to be done. So I very much am given a free rein, and I think that's a wonderful thing. They trust me. They believe in what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. I think we understand one another. We don't always agree on everything, but there's an understanding of why we go down a road. I'm blessed because I've got a great team around me. I've got a terrific chief operating officer. But don't tell him I said that. Eddie has, and I have known one another for the better part of 20 years. I can pretty much finish his sentences and vice versa. Having said that, he would also tell you, and he's right, that I'm probably tougher on him than I am on anybody because he knows me better than anybody. We brought on a chief commercial officer at the beginning of the year, Nada, who is absolutely moving mountains. I have a tremendous CIO, Dominic, who is, on the technology end of things, is really a forward thinker. So he's looking to where we're going, not where we are or where we've been. And that's a tremendous advantage with the fast pace of technology change. And then I got some great AVPs in the field and some great general managers. And what's most important, I think, is to trust all of them to do what needs to be done. So I try not to get distracted with things that I don't need to be doing, that they are doing and they will be doing. And most of them spend their time trying to keep me out of anything because they say, you don't need to be involved, I'll take care of it. And that's a wonderful place to be. The development side of things takes an awful lot of time, without a shadow of a doubt. It's about building relationships. But the development side for me is a very important piece. And I'm going to probably cover a few subjects here. So forgive me and feel free to ask questions. But I'm not looking to, I'm in the hotel business. I'm not in the business of hotels. When I say that, what I mean is that for me, what's most important is that my hotels are successful, and with the success of those hotels, so my fee streams come. I am not looking at putting pins on the map to add a great number of hotels to drive fee streams. So it's a different model in that sense. The big brands who are at 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 hotels, in my opinion, are in the business of hotels, which is very different from the business that I'm in. So I'm very focused on driving that performance, and this does tie back to being a family business. Does that slow our expansion? I don't think so. I don't, but it may. It is. I can't compete, and I'll be very clear. I can't compete, but who can with Bonvoy? Bonvoy, the Marriott machine. I mean, do they even call it Marriott anymore? It is now Bonvoy on everything. That's what drives their performance. I am not in that business. I'm in the business of taking care of guests so that they come back and drive the revenues of the hotel, which drives my fees, that's what I get paid for. So juggling it all is tough. But when you've got great people, I mentioned Nada a minute ago. She's been with us now for 10 months. She has moved mountains, and she continues to move mountains. My biggest challenge with Nada is to try and get her to take time off. Her husband tells me that she doesn't send emails at the weekend now because she knows I'll catch her out. But she spends her time writing them, he tells me. You've got to be surrounded, and this has always been my philosophy. Surround yourself with the best people you can and put them in a position to be successful. And that's how you work your way through it. Yeah, there are weeks that are insane. But you get through them because as a team, you pull together, and that's how you do it. And, it's no different. When people say, oh, well, it's very different being a CEO to being a general manager of a hotel. Not really. At the end of the day, a successful GM will surround themselves with the best people they can, who equally will deal with the plethora of challenges that come and help that GM get through it. It's just you're just not dealing with the same issues. You're dealing with maybe issues that are more consequential in nature to the company than what a GM is making decisions about in an individual hotel, because you could be impacting 10,000 people, as in the case of Rotana, or a substantial amount of revenues that would have huge impact on the company. So, long answer to the question, but I'm sure you get my point as to where I'm going with that. I want to stay connected to the hotels and what's happening in the hotels, but I don't want to get in their way. And I don't think I'm not sure that Rotana would ever want to be 2,000 hotels. I don't want to speak for the chairman. Maybe 200. But I think what's most important, going back to that initial conversation for him, is quality. I've never seen him as excited as he was the other day when he looked at our guest satisfaction results, again stacking us up against some other brands, and was so thrilled to see where we were on that list, heading towards the top. That's what matters to him. It really is. Yes, making money matters to him, but it is quality.
You look after your clients. You're going to look after your bottom line at the end of the day. I can see with you, it's all about trust, isn't it? So making sure you've been given trust, and then pushing that trust down the leadership structure of the business as well, and particularly with your GMs, and that's a smart way to run a business. But do you miss that being a general manager and being involved in all the activities of running a hotel and the different challenges you have operating a hotel with clients?
Jonathan, I miss it from time to time. You have to you look back through my track record, and from the Savoy to the Pacific Rim in Vancouver to the Pierre back in New York many years ago to the Shangri-La in Singapore. I ran a lot of, always in senior positions in a lot of hotels, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and I really enjoyed it. I could use that pat expression of I never had to work a day in my life because I loved what I was doing. But I have to tell you, you don't know this when you take on a new job like this one. You don't know what you're going to love and what you're not going to love. But again, I can't say I'm working now. I'm still loving every day. And yes, it's a different set of challenges. And, I think maybe I had reached that point of day-to-day operations in hotels where, again, you surround yourself with great teams, and then you don't have to be quite so concerned about it. So I'm not going to say I'd grown out of it, because that would be very presumptuous on my part. But I certainly wanted a fresh start. I wanted to do something different. And I was approached about a number of things. I took a year off between leaving Fairmont and coming to Rotana. And in that year, I was approached on a number of occasions about going to do things that I had done before, for lack of a better description. Opening a new hotel, running a luxury hotel, running a number of luxury hotels, et cetera, et cetera. And I got to be honest, Jonathan, I didn't get too excited about any of them. And that sounds very blasé and very presumptuous and almost quite arrogant. And I don't mean it to do so, but I think it's important. You've got to continue to learn and grow and develop as an individual. It doesn't matter how old you are or what you've done. I've said to people on many occasions, if you're taking on a new job and you're not somewhat frightened about it, then you're not taking the right job, you know. And taking on this job, it was sort of like, okay, there's a lot of this I know, but there's a lot of this that I don't know, and it's going to be a big learning curve. And that's going to be exciting and challenging and intimidating. And it was all of the above, and it still is, right? So I think it's really important that as people, we keep growing and we keep learning. And I think, my team has heard me say a million times, I bet when I talk about their careers and development, and I say, listen, you have two choices in life. You have the driver's seat or you have the passenger seat. And if you go in the passenger seat, you go where somebody else takes you. That's a very different thing from being in the driver's seat. And this is I had reached this point where I wanted to do something new and different. I don't know that I necessarily recognized it until I made the decision to walk away. But then having done so, it was like, okay, do something new and different. And to be honest with you, it could have come in many different forms. I don't know, but I just got lucky enough to get offered this opportunity.
And also you're, moving into that mid and upper scale brands as well, because you come from that luxury sector, working at the Savoy and the Fairmont, etc. What sort of luxury is muscle memory do you have that you've brought to Rotana from your experience previously?
Jonathan, I have a lot of wonderful friends in the luxury hotel business, all of whom are scathing when I talk to them, and fast to point out, challenges, which is what your closest friends do. None of your close friends are ever nice to you; they're always rude to you, and that's certainly true of all of mine. Luxury to me is, I think the word is bandied around far too much these days. Luxury is not a question of linens or glassware or silverware, or any of those things, or fixtures and fittings, or the marble on the lobby floor. It is not about those things. It was, and it still is, all about the guest experience. And as has been said a million times, it's not what you say, it's not what you do, it's how you make people feel. That defines luxury. And luxury, if I'm looking at Rotana, if I bring that thought process into play in Rotana, it is very much along the lines of how we take care of the team, how we take care of the guests. Because we may not be in the luxury business, but we are in a business that is all about taking care of guests. And, you and I have both stayed in luxury hotels where you've walked out feeling like that was a waste of time. Okay. So for me, if I've got a 4-star hotel or a Centro hotel that makes you feel special and makes you feel like you're the most important person on the planet, then that to me is what matters. And I've used this example in my hotels as I've gone around Rotana. I talked to them and I specifically referenced there's a lady called Rosalind who serves breakfast at the Savoy. And when I was working there, I said to one of my food and beverage managers, I said, if I ever lose you, it will be a bad day. But if I ever lose Rosalind, it will be a disaster. Because Rosalind made every guest feel like they were the most important person on the planet. That's got nothing to do with the quality of the china, glassware, silverware she was using, or the fixtures and fittings of the Savoy. Yes, they were all beautiful. But without Rosalind, the Savoy is not the luxury hotel that it needs to be. And my view, therefore, is that Rotana has this wonderful opportunity to position itself below that positioning of luxury, right? But pushing on the edge of it. I've got a hotel in Bahrain, the Onyx Rotana. Absolutely stunning, the fit out. And it is running the highest RGI in the marketplace right now. And it's got our brand on it. It's got a great GM and it's got a great team in there and it's got a great fit out. And that to me that's what you can achieve, right? So, that's what I apply. I bring that thought process to everything we do because that's the way I grew up. And, well, not grew up necessarily, but those are the things that I believed in. And that goes back to, I was in London recently and I was in a newly opened luxury hotel and I wouldn't go back, right? regardless of the fixtures, the fittings, and the fit out. I wouldn't go back because of the arrogance of the people I ran into. Right? So that's it. That's my opportunity.
No, I like that approach. So one of your focuses, of course, is on that whole development pipeline and everything else. And Nada, who you hired, Nada, right, head of the commercial. So when she's going into a meeting, probably bringing you along at times as well. No doubt you've had the other big brands going in at the same time or before and after, speaking to the owners about this new hotel opportunity. They come in with their thirty brands. They've got all the different brand segments that they can deliver to the owner. What's your proposition when you're speaking to the owners? And you know, do you come away from that at times say, damn, I wish we just had a few more brands?
No, Jonathan, it's very easier to spend your time focusing on what you don't have. I think I tend to focus my time on what we do have. And when you talk about what's our USP, I'll tell you that it will usually boil down to some pretty simple things. I had an owner call me not long ago, somebody I've known for a long time, who has 2 hotels in another part of the world, both with the big brands. And his comment to me was, he said, I love it. He said, I can call you and you answer your phone. He said, I can't call the CEO of my own company and expect to get a response within 2 weeks. Okay. For me, that is the opportunity that is significant for us right now. The big brands have become so big. They have become disconnected from that ground level relationship that I think is so important. And, having worked in North America, as you know, and having worked in Europe, a lot of hotels are owned are institutionally owned in those big parts of the world. So it's a business, very clearly a business. And the owner has a business perspective and nothing else. Here in this part of the world, your owners are frequently not dissimilar to who I work for, a family or individuals. And so there's a much more important emotional connection that's needed, right, in order to really move forward. It goes back to something you said a few minutes ago about trust. They need to know that they trust you. They need to know that you're going to be there. They need to know that they can get you on the phone. And I think that's one advantage that we have right now. The other advantage that we have right now, in my opinion, is that, and I am working quite hard on this as well, is our Emirati roots and being connected to the region in ways that people understand. If I'm in Saudi or I'm in Jordan or I'm, anywhere in the immediate region, people understand who we are. They understand what our roots are. And that gives them a level of comfort as well. Now, going back to my point about Bonvoy, I can't compete with Bonvoy. So don't even try. All right. Yes, I'm part of the Global Hotel Alliance, but we're still tiny compared to that. But that doesn't concern me as much as being able to explain to the guest how I will drive their business, the support systems that I have in place here, the team that I have in place. I have 100 people in the corporate office for my, just over 80 operating hotels. There are a lot of those big brands in this region that probably only have the same number of people in their corporate offices, but they've got 2,000 hotels to look after. That gives you some idea of where my opportunity lies. And I don't go in there bad-mouthing my competition. That's not my point. But there's a very different proposition. And when you're dealing with smart people, as we are with owners, they quickly work out what you will bring to the table. But they want to be able to have that conversation face-to-face and to be able to call you and get an answer and be able to deal with things quickly, or to come into the corporate office here in Abu Dhabi, which again is an important component, where everything is driven out of here. Nothing's driven out of, other parts of the world. Nothing's driven out of Paris. Nothing's driven out of London. It's all driven from here. So they can come in and sit down with Nada and look at what we are doing from a commercial standpoint, for example, and understand what's happening to the whole company. So that's where I see my USP. I really do see that as an advantage.
I can see that being an advantage, and you can also see it being an advantage in terms of one of the biggest challenges you have, of course, is employing people for your growth, your expansion, and maintaining good quality staff in your hotels. That must be a real USP when you're hiring people.
I think, listen, I would say this to you, Jonathan. We were blessed recently to bring on an area vice president, Khaled, who joined us, who is in Saudi. He looks after Saudi for us, and he looks after Jordan for us. So he's got a lot on his plate. Khaled ended up in our offices because someone within the organization, I don't know who, had been talking to him about Rotana and the environment in Rotana. And I say this because yesterday I sent him a note about something and just said, thank you, and this is great. And he sent me a note back and said, I love working with this company. I'm having such a good time. That's what matters in every organization. And I always say, I remember I was opening a hotel in Vancouver in 99, 2000. And it was going to be a tough hotel. And we were doing the recruiting, and I was being particularly difficult. So my number two told me, who's still a very close friend to this day, in not accepting anybody who didn't meet the standards that I was looking for. And he'd say, well, you rejected 3 people today. Why did you reject them? I said, well, that one didn't smile. That one didn't say good morning. That one, didn't have any energy. Anyway, then a few weeks went by, and Vancouver is a very small town, right? And all of a sudden, the caliber of candidates we were seeing had gone up dramatically. And I said to one day, I said, well, what are you doing here? How did you get here? And she said, well, I heard this was a really tough place to get a job. And I want to work in a place that's demanding and demands to be the best. And that is what people want. Good people want to be surrounded by good people, which is why if you make a mistake and you hire somebody who's not right, who doesn't fit in, you better fix it quickly, because otherwise it sends a message to everybody else that says you accept mediocrity. And that's the tough part of the job, is when you make a mistake, fixing it. But you need to fix it quickly. Right. So that is part of the equation. But I'll touch on something else, because I think it also helps, Jonathan. We joined Global Hotel Alliance for one major reason, which was obviously the loyalty program, with going to be 32, 33 million people by the end of the year, I'm sure. We joined it for that reason primarily, but there was a secondary reason for us. We are and have been a regional brand. What GHA does for us is it elevates our profile very dramatically, right? And as a result of moving in or becoming part of Global Hotel Alliance, which incidentally we start December the 1st with Rotana Discovery, but we're now being approached by a lot of different organizations from the ones that we were dealing with before, because now our name is on the screen, as it were. Now the profile is changing, and that is also helping us in terms of the future. I spoke to a gentleman yesterday I was interviewing for a general manager role, and I said, why Rotana? He said, I've been watching you guys now for over a year. He said, you're moving the dial. There's energy, there's activity. People are talking about you. Things are happening. And I don't mean corporately. I mean in the hotels as well. And so it's your reputation that is first and foremost will drive so many things. It's what people say about you that matters, not what you say about yourself. And I've said that for years. And so that's when people are proud and they're enjoying it and they're having fun, they tell other people, right? Just as true if they're not having a good time. Yeah, there's a lot of activity in Africa. We have been in conversations with a number of different projects around different parts of Africa. Of course, we've signed for an opening in Somalia probably in 2028. We've got a project in Ghana moving forward. We're already operating in Dar es Salaam and Congo, and we've been talking extensively about a project in Zanzibar, another project in Nairobi. So a lot of things that have been happening in all of those different markets. Um, I'm very I'm very focused on Africa, I have to say. I think one of the Africa, people have called Africa the sleeping giant. I'm not sure about that, but it's certainly the amount of investment that's going into Africa from China, the whole development that's going on throughout large parts of Africa is going to open a plethora of doors in the next decade that have up until now been, really very almost out of sight and out of mind. Africa's changing radically, just as the rest of the world is changing radically. And I see for us, Africa is a natural because there's a natural connection between Africa and the Middle East. There's a huge amount of business that is done between the UAE and different parts of Africa, between Saudi and different parts of Africa. And the Chinese influence obviously being what it is, that's also heading this way. So to me, the connectivity throughout it's a part of the world that I think we have an opportunity, an advantage over. I have been asked about Europe. I've been asked about North America, but I just don't see, those are not on my screen. The chairman keeps telling me he'd love a hotel in London. Those things are not on my screen in the way that these other markets are, because that's where our opportunity lies to a very large extent, I believe.
Well, it's interesting too that we've got the Africa Investment Summit taking place on Monday during FHS.
Yes.
We've got 20 tourism ministers now coming. This is organized by the UAE government, but we're delighted to be working in partnership with the government on this initiative. Invitation only, but there's a real focus now on Africa. So it's interesting to hear what you just said, Philip.
Yeah. Well, and Eddie, Chief Operating Officer, will be there at that event.
Good. Good. That's great. Listen, my team are going to kill me because typically we try to keep these podcasts to 30 minutes, but we've gone way over, and just wonderful storytelling, Philip. But if I could ask you just for a one-liner here, one final question, just define Rotana's edge, for owners and guests. What is it you're going to say to an owner and a guest about Rotana in one line?
A one-liner. Oof. I mean, Jonathan, the only way I can describe us is as we are. We're a family-owned Emirati, currently regional, about to be global brand. If you're looking for a one-liner, that's as close as I can get, because I think the words family and regional, Emirati, those are the things that encompass who we are. Right? And if those things are appealing, huh?
I would add trusted to that as well.
I would say yes. You're right. Trusted by our guests, by our owners. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Philip, listen, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. Always interesting to hear from you and your views on the industry and hearing of your experience. It's been a real thrill and a treat for me to be interviewing you today.
You're very welcome, Jonathan. You're very welcome. And I'll see you next week.
And I'll see you next week. Absolutely. Look forward to it. Thank you, Phil.
All right.